So, this was a kind of a thought experiment. How can we shape environments without a training budget? And I really wanted to be clear that this is not an argument against training. It's not, really it isn't. But it is an argument against wasteful training, where any kind of human resource intervention that is supposed to develop skill doesn't produce any outcome at work because the context isn't appropriate. And what do we mean by this context? Maybe it's the nature of OD work, but we've been called into a few environments recently where the presenting problem, might be considered skills, but the underlying issue is very much more kind of a structural, systemic problem. And no amount of training, as these clients had discovered after trying to train the problems out, seem to be working. So what we want to do is define what we mean. And I think as a hook for the conversation today, it's around improving capability, capacity, productivity, and performance without a training budget. So if you didn't have that budget line, what could you work on? And that takes us straight into organizational design. So I'd love it in the chat box as we go along. For those of you who have some experience or lots of experience in organizational design, this conversation today is really just, we're going to be in the shallow end. I'm going to talk about a couple of models just to get the conversation moving. If you have other models that you like, or your own models that you like, please put them in the chat box. Please be as generous as you can with trying to build off whatever it is I'm saying. And let's see if that gets us to a place, an interesting place together. So to begin and get your minds into it, I want to put you into the chat rooms. If Liesel's hopefully been getting ready to do that. Maybe it helps if you write down this question. What is the issue that I would love to solve without a training budget? So that puts you, like really challenge yourself to think of something that would be really cool if it could be solved without a training budget. Once you've identified a couple of those, and I think that's the most important piece, if you've still got time left in your room, talk about what have you tried? What have you tried that did not involve spending training, rands, training money? So hopefully you understand the call, and Lisa will pop you into the breakout groups as soon as she's ready, I guess.
I am ready. I'm opening the rooms, and you should have the invitation on your screen.
Welcome back, everybody. I hope your breakout sessions were as amazing as mine. I'd love to get some feedback from you, and the feedback I'm looking for from each of the rooms is quite specific. I'm sure you had great conversation. I don't want you to share that now. It's just to summarize what were the things that people wished they could change without a training budget? What came up in your room? And if there was interesting things that they'd tried, what has been tried? So if you can keep it as short as possible. How many rooms did we have, Liesl?
4.
4. So 4 rooms. I guess if 2 minutes each will be done in 8 or 10 minutes, just debriefing what the room said. If you've been here before and you were in room 1, could you give us a sense of, in room 1, what did you wish you could change without a training budget, and what's been tried?
So that's Daphne, Samuel, Vivian, and Mbadi.
One brave volunteer from room 1.
So indeed, Craig, we did have really interesting conversations, pulling to different sides, and a specific answer to that question, even though it's a bit distant, would be one person who spoke about learning on YouTube. That's the only thing that has been helpful, that doesn't require much budget. but most of us in the group could just agree that training is necessary and there should be budget for it. It should be in the strategic conversations, and there was no other person who have tried anything that doesn't require budget.
Thanks very much, room one. So I guess room one got like, they just looked at the question and went, no.
Sort of, yes.
Training budgets and no. Room two.
Room two, Anita, Caroline, Lawrence, and Niven.
Okay, let me start. Maybe I've tried to filter through some of the notes I've made. 4 points, and please, the rest of the team need to rescue me here. I think without a budget, it's important. Well, it's not negotiable just to have the right people with the right inclination towards teaching or learning to be the supervisors. The role it should be part of their roles. That's the second point. If you have somebody that just manages system, it's not going to work. You need to have people that can coach, and well, it's actually now I'm mixing up my points now. But you have to have people that are coaches, mentors on site, and that's important. Then you don't need a budget. But to divert somewhat, there is if you have people that just managing a system, they're actually they're negating their own responsibilities as leaders, and I think that's very important. And maybe the last point to that, what I've picked up is that what I've said is from an old professor of mine that said, if you want to really learn something, go and teach. It's only when you teach something that you really understand how much you know about it. And that's crucial. If a supervisor tells me that this Boilermaker is making a mess, I said, okay, go and teach him. And then I find out how much you know about your job or their job. So it's important. So please, the rest of the team, the group, please just add.
Anybody need to add anything to that? I think that's helpful. That's something that you can try, not necessarily what you could try to change. Was anything missed from that group?
Craig, it's Caroline. Sorry, I'm not putting my camera on right now.
Hi,
I just
Caroline.
thought hi, morning. We said that if there's sort of a culture of always learning, a culture of coaching, a sort of 360, that people don't breaking away from working in silos. Those are some things you could change to not have a training budget, to integrate, not have silos was a key word, and then turn things around, not really fixing people's weaknesses, but looking at their strengths. And then I can go to you for things you are strong at, and you can come to me for things I'm strong at. And then a key point that Anita said is, if we see the gift in other people instead of always, and then recognize the gift, but not want to compete with it.
Thank you very much, Caroline. And I think that's brought us into that broader culture space. And we're going to touch on that a bit further. Room three.
Room three was Richard, Runel, Sindiswa, and Tinus.
You want to go for it, Tinus, or?
Sindiswa, maybe you give the summary and then I'll make that final point.
Sure. So for us, while we felt that a training budget should be, we also initially went no, we also kind of tried to think creatively around the topic. And one of the great points that came up is that sometimes it's not about the money, because you'll find that organizations have money for other things that might seem frivolous. So why isn't there a training budget? And one of the points we came up with is, if we had a magic wand, the issue we would then like to solve is, what are the leaders' priorities? and what are they prioritizing over capacitating and equipping the resources, the assets even, that they often will say they will give lip service to our people are our most important asset. So we thought if we had a magic wand, that would be the issue to solve, to talk about, so what are the priorities? How do those priorities then align with your budget allocation? We didn't get to the second question.
Mhm. Thanks. And just to add to that, one of quick kind of 30-second, we're a remote first organization. And so we've got people scattered all over the world, which makes training and learning and development interesting, to say the least. But the one point I wanted to make was when I joined the organization as training manager, one of the first things that I did was I started getting people into the habit of logging or capturing what internal training is happening. Because I find that so often there's a huge amount that happens below the surface and nobody knows about it, but it needs to happen anyway. And again, in the absence of budget, training will still happen. It will just happen informally and internally. And so probably for the first 6 months that I was there, we use Notion for those that use it as our database and knowledge base. And so it was a constant thing of, have you logged your internal training on Notion? Similar, any newbies that join the organization after their core induction, one of the final things I say to them is, you're going to now go and do your departmental induction. The moment that you have any kind of training with anyone, either you or them must go and log it on Notion. And that has made such a big difference, because all of a sudden people realize and because it's all open and transparent, people can see the full scope of learning that is happening in the organization. And that obviously doesnn't require a budget. It just requires time and effort.
Tinus, can I ask a clarifying question about that? Who gets recognized when they log on Notion? Does the training provider, internal training provider, get recognized, for example?
So we've got two columns. One is the person doing the training, and then the attendees, whether it's a one-on-one or, a small group or whatever it is. And then, the date, the time, the topic, and the like. So, for the moment, it's just tracking and analysis. We haven't, as part of our annual kind of, awards, given recognition to the informal trainers, but it's just been very, very useful to see because we are quite a diverse company. I mean, we've got software development, and then we've got sales, and a whole bunch in between. That it's just interesting to kind of see the broad scope of how much training, internal training that doesn't cost anything, actually takes place on an ongoing basis.
That sounds like it's just in time and driven in the flow of work almost. If the project requires a particular approach or skill set, somebody's going to set that up and get it delivered.
Absolutely.
So I think that's an amazing story. Thank you. We've spent a bit of time on room 4.
Was not your room, Craig?
I know, but I don't want to
Nerissa
be in my own
and
room. It'll be boring. So somebody else, I had 3 amazing women there. So one of them can.
Nerissa, Ntwaki, and Tebogo.
Nerissa and Tebogo, I think you guys should go. I missed half the conversation.
Sure. So we spoke a couple of points that we pulled out. What is the issue that I'd love to solve without a training budget? We spoke around culture. How do we get back to the core culture and bring in the cultural values if we don't have a training budget? We also spoke around employee engagement. Oftentimes you find that people don't want to attend training if they're not getting something out of it, some kind of freebie. And then on the senior management side, they want to see the performance around it. If I give you my people and I take away from my operational time, then what am I getting out of this? So we spoke around managing performance as well, and those were kind of the issues that we had pulled out. The rest of the group just wants to add on.
Anybody want to build on that? Is that enough?
Hi, I think it's the summary of all that we said. I can't add anything on it. Thanks.
Maybe just an emphasis on, getting managers to manage was one that I heard. How to get managers to manage without a training budget, and then the performance issues at the individual and team level. How do you get teams to get more productive without the training budget? Yeah, so excellent. Hopefully your heads are in the space. Let's see where we go now. As you know, I'll share a few slides, and then you'll be back in a discussion group to try and make sense of whatever it is that I've said. Good. Okay, so because we're into organizational design, I've got to start somewhere, and we've got about a 15-minute tour of org design. So I want to start at the beginning, which is the relationship between structure and agency. And for those of you who studied sociology, you'll recognize that distinction. Well, it's not just a distinction in sociology, it's a distinction inside the organization. Structure defined as the formal and informal systems, rules, and hierarchies. And interestingly, that it would include culture. Culture is structural. It's not agency, if you look at that definition, because agency is the capacity of individuals to act independently and make choices. Whereas, and we'll keep looking at this culture thing and others as we move through, at the very least, culture is structured or structurated by the dominance of the way things are. We often call that context, as if that explains everything. Context. Well, context is a complicated word. And then agency, the extent to which people can either change the structure, change the rules, change the way things are, or the way people act to maintain it, to keep it going, to follow the rules, to comply. So agency can be thought of as compliant, which makes the structure stronger, or it can be thought of as challenging, and that will weaken and possibly even change the structure. So these two ideas are what we have to play with if we're going to start to ask the question, could we change things without a budget? Well, what are things? Where could you act? And you can act in the structure space, or you can act in the agency space, or both. So let's use some models to think about what we mean by structure and try and open that up a little. Because I think the structural space, once you see it, you kind of recognize it. Jay Galbraith, I'd love to know in the chat on the side, how many of you have ever looked at Galbraith's STAR model? I'm deliberately using Galbraith. There are many other contemporaries, both more modern and slightly older, but I think Galbraith sits in the middle of with his STAR model. And Galbraith says the structure of the firm, the structure of the organization, firstly, is all about information flows. And he talks about policy as the way information is regulated and flows through an organization. And of course, a way of thinking about training and development is, can I get information into someone's head such that it changes their behavior? So the whole of Galbraith's work, life's work, was about the organization as an information processing engine. And he he starts off with strategy. So this sense of, in any one of your units and in every one of the places that you're trying to solve the problem, whether it's from Tsogo-san to the Ghana Aid Organization, the first question is the strategy clear? You know, I think Narissa in our group was also talking about getting in and having a chat to managers and trying to find exactly what KPIs or what problems are trying to get solved. It's that sense of, is the strategy clear? We've been working recently-ish with a client, and there's behavioral problems right at the end of the line, but we think that they're being triggered by lack of strategic clarity at the front of the line. That where parties don't understand what the shared goals and tasks are, there's more likely to be clashes, more likely to be loss of productivity, loss of performance, or even frustration and conflict. So clear strategies, not just within, but across teams and across departments. How do we work together? What is that we need to be focused on? What is more important than what is critical. Now, you may say in the modern age where everything's VUCA and uncertain and so on, it's impossible to have these long-range strategies. Okay, agreed. Then the strategic clarity that must be shared between departments is we're working on very short ranges, and we're going to have to talk more often. You know, it's not like because it's an uncertain world, organizations, which is groups of people, can function without clarity. It just means you've got to meet more often to make sense of what's going on and decide how you're going to align. So Galbraith starts off and he says, it should be clear to you that strategy determines the rest of the organization, including if there is no strategic clarity. It has massive influence on the rest of the organization. And in the bucket of strategy, you can include questions of purpose. Why do we exist? Vision, goals, unpack that whole thing. Then Galbraith talks about structure. In structure, you've got the usual suspects of, span, of control, and, divisionalization. And I like to break that structural thing down and use Mintzberg for the whole structure conversation. So in the next row, you've got Henry Mintzberg's line, which is, first off, know what kind of animal you are. Are you a personal enterprise, program machine, professional assembly? Tennis sounds to me is coming from the professional assembly project pioneer kind of space. The project pioneers would be the software development teams. The professional assemblies might be the kind of sales organization, or that might be a program machine. What are you? And remember that it won't just be one thing. Usually, if you're big like Old Mutual, you'll have quite a few of these things inside you. So structurally, you've got a shape, you've got a form, you've got dynamics inside those structures. And Galbraith says there must be fit. The strategy and the structure, the strategy and the form should align. Usually does naturally if you're still being run by your founder. So if you're a small or medium-sized organization and the founder is there, you're likely to be running as a personal enterprise, and the strategy is going to be what's coming out of the founder's head. And there's likely to be alignment between those two. The moment you've got professional management in and independent shareholders, you can start to see disconnects happening all over the place as you get churn in the leadership layers. Strategy structure overlays over time will start to conflict. And so performance is deeply impacted by those discontinuities. So structure, and then eventually, span of control, how many people should I have reporting to me, that sort of thing, is about the degrees of specialization, the distribution of power, and the extent of departmentalization inside the structure. Then Mintzberg talks about process, and process is in all senses, in his world anyway, about the horizontal workflows. So how do we get an order processed? How do we get a a policy sold? How do we do underwriting? How do we register a guest at Soho? How do we have the process of bringing on a new call it client in the aid organization in Ghana? Those kind of horizontal processes and vertical processes of reward, of not so much reward and recognition, but budget allocation, resource allocation. Who gets people, who gets teams, who gets computers. So vertical and horizontal processes, which must align with the structure, which must align with the strategy. Then, of course, Galbraith goes to reward. So he says how you compensate and how you, through your whole system, of course, not just your internal staff. So rewards through your networks and what that strategy looks like. And then he gets to people, where his HR policies, and that would be, training budgets and so on. All of which he is insistent are wasted if they don't line up with reward, process, structure, and strategy. So I thought Galbraith's a useful way to start. If you're asking the question, how could we develop skills? How could we develop the organization if we didn't have a training budget? Well, my first piece of advice is read Galbraith. I mean, he's written a lot. There's a fair amount out there, and there's some great tips that you can just run through and go, how good are we at this? Is our strategy clear? Are our cross team, our teams necessarily aligned on these things? Are the structures appropriate? And these are conversations that you can have inside the business, potentially without a training budget. At World's View, we in 2013, synthesized a bunch of org design stuff and came up with the RE&A version of this. So we kick off with purpose. Is the purpose clear? Right? That sense of strategy for us, strategy is too big a word. We like, do you know why you exist? Do you know what your goals are now to the furthest horizon? And have you got that shared nicely and clearly? Then we look at process and we want to know, do you know what you have to be good at? Do you know how you're going to be good at it? And because nothing kills productivity more than a manager, in our opinion, who says, well, we need you to double sales. And then the manager leaves the room. So salespeople are desperate for a conversation around, well, how do you want us to do that? Are we allowed to take on more customers? Are we allowed to change customer types? Can we go to new markets? Mintzberg calls that management by deeming or decree. You give a decree and then you walk away. And actually, no, you've got to stay in the discussion and figure out the how part of this conversation. So how are you going to do it, and what are the capabilities? And your primary organizational structure comes from there. So how you build is around those capabilities. Then you bolt systems into that. Technology has a place to play. Then we get to roles. So what do people need to do around those systems and processes? And then we get to that cadence, operation, reward, compensation kind of space, and training. So there's a lovely quote that I wanted to give you, which is from Mintzberg, from Galbraith, from J. Galbraith. And the quote goes like this: managers can influence performance and culture, but only by acting through design policies that will influence behavior. So managers can influence performance and culture, but only by acting through the design policies that will influence behavior. And I believe that he is true. I'm about to hit 60 this year. I think we all know that you never quite understand an organization until you try to change it. You don't even understand a person until you actually try to change them. So, and by change them, it might sound a bit harsh, but every time we're trying to improve performance, we are trying to produce some sort of change. So I'm maybe being a bit blunt with my language. So you sit down and you have a conversation with the full organization or with a person, and you try and figure out how to change them. And then you realize it's like 10% is voluntary in terms of their own agency. 90% will be the rest of this design. What's happening in strategy, structure, process, reward, and policy around the human spaces, before I spend my training dollars. That's structure. Hopefully that's getting some sparks in your head, because you're going to be back in a breakout room shortly. Let's touch on agency, and that is, I'm just going to work with Peter Block, ProSci, and then again the worldview thing. So another way of thinking about what's happening in your organizations is what's happening inside and between organizations, people, inside and between people. This is, where I love attending things like the Nolana Murray sessions, this space of, and to my mind, largely worked on through psychology and a psychological orientation to what's happening within and between people. So Peter Block talks about what happens when you try to bring people together in your business. Narissa talks about, it's often the case that people won't come to the training if they don't get a t-shirt kind of thing. Well, Peter Block will say, look at the invitation. Try to figure out what's going on in that invitation. And he really talks about choice as being critical in that space. So like, if you don't want to come, don't come. But if you do want to come, we'll make it as good as we can. But again, Peter talks about, we'll make it as good as we can, but most of how good it's going to be is up to you. So if you want to come, and it'll be as good as you make it. I can't promise that the trainer is going to be brilliant or anything like that. The invitation is really important. Then these possibility conversations. So, how you create the story determines everything. And again, OD practitioners on the call, this. If the story is, Mary failed and she's useless, she hasn't got the skills. Mary's just dragging us down here. Mary's confrontational. If that's the story, then, well, Mary's pretty isolated and should probably leave. If the story is we failed, in some way, the structure of the organization didn't work out, but the possibility is that we could all get together and try and figure it out, then you've got a different thing going on. And you guys inside the organizations, you can see, when we invite people, do we invite them or command them? Is there choice? When we talk about possibility, are we talking about like blame or are we talking about accountability? And in the ownership conversations, the importance of dissent, the move to commitment, and the gifts conversation, which we heard from room 3, this idea of working with people's strengths and really recognizing that collectively we're going to be good. And again, I want to emphasize this, there are organizations that don't work that way, and they just talk about blame and punishment and exclusion, and then they get really angry that Europe's not paying their share of the, bombing the Houthis to clear the Suez Canal, and we get that kind of conversation going, and it goes, So you've got these 2 different ways, 3 different ways, 4 different ways. ProSci talks about awareness, design, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement, and you can understand how ProSci is trying to work with the human aspect of change through that ADCAR model. It's really popular. Lots of people train on ADCAR. And then in Worldview, we talk about the shifts between who gets included in the boundary conversations when the framing is being done, and we're trying to put a name to the problem. Who's in the room? Who's there? We see too many things where the problem's about Mary, but we don't put Mary in the room when we start the conversation. Then the possibility conversation, same as, what are the options here? Choice, development, integration, that movement, and how you do that, inclusive or exclusive, power, what kind of power is in that space? That's a designer's psychology, designer's inclusion, as opposed to designer's structure. So that hopefully gets you thinking a little bit about the agency. How could you change the way some of these things happen without a training budget? And that usually is a conversation with your C-suite, if you can get to it. So then we get the usual suspects, and some of these came up. Recruitment and selection, of course. So it's not, you can't just announce tomorrow that all of your managers now need to be coaches and mentors. You're going to have to drift into that over time. You'd have to recruit for the ability and the desire to be a teacher, you have to promote for that. You can't go to people who've been promoted based on their technical skills and try and switch them on as mentors. All of you with L&D budgets who've tried that, you can spend the training money, it doesn't necessarily work. It might help for a while, but the underlying issue is, are you recruiting and developing for that? Are you building internally or externally? Do most of your managerial hires come from outside? In which case, I don't know how useful they are as mentors in their first or second year. Or are you on internal development paths? Well, if you're on internal development paths, you've got a much better chance of leading in the way of work if you can retain that staff. Of course, performance management and enablement. But the design of the whole performance management project is what's in question here. Is the essence of it performance management or performance enablement? And if you're not sure of the distinction, it's not just semantics. I have a great friend who puts his finger down his throat every time I say that. Is it performance management or performance enablement? And if you're not sure of the distinction, check it out. And that's around philosophy. And again, if your recruitment and selection and promotion paths are not, as Lauren said, if you're not biased towards manager as coach, manager as teacher, mentor, then your performance management system defaults to a performance management system and control system, and you don't get it as a possible development mechanism. Of course, coaching and mentoring, the holy grail of getting back to the artisan and apprenticeship approaches. And then what somebody touched on YouTube, but I think we're at the end of that moment, and I think we're at AI. So everybody who has not yet tried going to learn something, get ChatGPT to teach them something, if there is anybody left, I think they're falling like dominoes. So your employees are more and more going to AIs for just-in-time AI conversations. I think in a structured environment, some of you might be training your own AIs to be, training support for staff. And I'm 99% sure if you haven't already started that, you will be in the next year. The only problem with that, of course, is your staff, why would they want to use yours? I mean, they can just go out there for any other AI as well. So that might be a bit of a waste of loot. All right. I've talked at 100 miles an hour. Quick recap. You got no training budget, but you want to develop some sort of expertise. You want to solve some sort of problem. It might be the culture, which is code for everything. Culture is a big outcome of a bunch of structural and agentic areas. You might want to teach managers to manage, Well, where do you start if you haven't got a training budget? And you'd need to think about starting through coaching and mentoring and in your performance enablement system from the top down. So the CEO has coached the next line is coached through performance enablement. And you'd want to switch on a bit of AI. You want to give people access to GPT-4 and let them start talking about that stuff. So structural solutions, agentic solutions. If you're powerful enough inside your own organization, you've got to be able to sit down and talk about the way things are done as much as what is done. And so those agentic shifts in terms of inclusion and belonging in the processes of the organization. Right, back to you, experts. You're going back into your breakout rooms and you're going to have another 10 minutes We'll probably get some drop off. So please, try and keep your rooms together, but you'll get a little bit of drop off. And then we're going to debrief as soon as you get back. I want to know what comes from this conversation. What are the no budget options that you actually have? Even if I want you to suspend your disbelief and go, if I could wave a magic wand, this would be my no budget option, because you've got a big voice in the back of your head going, but I could never discuss this with the CEO, but I wouldn't have, and that would be the hurdle you would need to overcome. So, I mean, listen for that but say, what could I do? That's a no budget option. Doesn't cost anything, but I'd need to overcome this hurdle. Okay, Lisa, pop us into groups and let's see. And of course, you're welcome to discuss anything else you want. What else comes up for you when you get into your room? We'll see you back in 10 minutes. Welcome back, everybody. Yeah, let's get straight into it. What do we have from room one? What comes up for you? Again, whoever's spokesperson for room one, you've got about 3 minutes so that we can pull all 4 rooms together and then tie it up before 10:30. So off you go. Teach us.
Is it okay if I go first? I can't remember what room I was in.
You were
Yes,
in room one.
we were room 1, Nicole.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. All right. Good. Sorry, now I've got a 10:30 meeting, so I just want to be able to get through the session and move to the next venue. So yeah, no, we had a great discussion, and obviously, our dreams and wild wishes are always to have a gigantic training budget, and we believe so much can be done with that. And so there is still that need coming from the group that, a training budget would really help. But the other points that we have put forward is recognizing that, the landscape of learning has changed as globalization has changed. Fourth industrial revolution has had an impact on the way we do things. So change is happening so rapidly and dynamically. So learning has to happen rapidly and dynamically. And, I think sometimes organizations get so focused, or leaders get so focused on, control, and, bums and seats and, sweating the resources, that we forget to take a human-centric approach and get people to actually invest in our people. And ultimately, it improves the bottom line. It keeps our customers happy. And it's the same old adage, and you think people will get it, but that need to want to control seems to be much higher. So taking a continuous learning framework or a model is something that, you're looking at. Only 10% is formal training. In a continuous learning model, you've got 20% that is social learning. It's like your peer-to-peer learning. And then you've got 70% that is experiential learning, right? So this is what we can do, if your leaders are empowered, and that, that messaging comes, very earnestly from the top, everyone's going to adopt, kind of, you as a kid, you mimic what your adults, your parents do. And similarly, as leaders, we will mimic what the top management is doing. So if they're taking a coaching approach, they're consulting, they invested in playing to people's strengths, the same thing will roll out, because you also hold along the line, you hold people accountable, you hold your managers accountable at every tier of how are you developing your people, how are you rotating, exposing them to different opportunities. So it's creating the kind of structures that allow, to be seconded to different projects, different departments, and creating a deeper learning across the organization, across the market, the industry, as opposed to just being an accountant in the business and stuck in the accounting or the finance department, or being an engineer in the business and stuck in engineering. Learning so that you cross collaborate, you brainstorming, and you solving business problems, not just writing a report or, you know, fixing a particular problem to your area. So, and by creating the structures of how your secondment into this project for 6 weeks or to that department for 3 months actually is part of your learning and development. What are the skills that you're developing? What are the capabilities that you're developing? So, you know, it starts with obviously having an understanding of your people, but also then tapping into that, the coaching conversation to say, you know, these are the attributes you bring to the business. These are opportunities for you to develop, to take you to the next level. And this is what can you do from your side in terms of the free YouTube, Udemy, and there's many platforms that you can learn. But how can I help you apply that? What opportunities can I create for you that is going to allow you to apply and test and, you know, be agile in your approach to learning? Because if organizations focus on learning, performance will come. But what happens is we focus on performance and there's no room to learn because you must get the job done. I need the report by 4 o'clock today. So we don't, even with online learning platforms, and we buy these, you know, a lot of global companies will have them, but they're not creating the space and time to learn and to say every Friday from 12 to 2 is your dedicated learning program. Like the previous person spoke about in the group around Notion and making sure you record it. Have some kind of line of sight visibility roadmap so that individuals, employees can see that they are growing. So many people in organizations I work with, they say there's no career development, but actually they've been exposed on so many levels. There's just no structure around how that's done. And I'm going to end there.
Thank you, Nicole. Anybody from room one wanted to add to that? Good, Nicole.
Perfectly summarized.
And perfectly so. Room two.
Okay,
You may build and you may take us in a different direction.
I think that's my room. Hey, Liesel?
Yes, Nevin. Yes, you and Lawrence and Caroline and Anita.
Perfect. Okay, great. Yeah, we all had this reaction to the presentation as being very, very dense. There was a lot of useful information there. So thanks, Craig, for burdening us with so much value. And we tried to, well, Caroline and Anita were having a conversation about how training shouldn't be a plaster fix for these underlying structural issues, these process issues, these culture changes that need to happen. And so learning needs to be embedded into the way that the organization runs. So I think she commented that good leaders are readers and lifelong learners. And I also commented in the first meeting that as human beings, from a psychological perspective, we are always learning. Right now we're learning through observational learning and experience and consequences. And so it really needs to, you need to think about how to embed it very deeply. So that was one notion there. Anita shared something very useful that she did when she had resource constraints and budget constraints. And she said that she trained if she could only train 2 of the 8 people that they had, then she would train 2, and then she'd have those 2 give a shorter training to the rest of the group. That way, the information is cemented in their mind, because Lawrence commented that we learn best when we have to teach something. That's when we really learn the information, when we know we're going to have to teach it. So it had that advantage of the 2 that presented, but then also was a way to teach the rest on that budget constraint. And Lawrence also said that L&D, money shouldn't be put into L&D to fix issues in recruitment and selection, which was on your slide as well, Craig. So we just commented on that, how valuable that is, that people shouldn't be trained on the things that they should have already known when they were selected for the job. That's a waste. That's a waste of resources, and that's something that recruitment and selection can fix, so that that gap doesn't have to be addressed by L&D. And then finally, we just spoke about CPD points. Myself and Lawrence, we spoke between ourselves, and how, you know, there's so many issues with continuous professional development points, because it's input based. It's based on measuring how many hours you trained, how many points you got, versus how is that translating into actual changes in your output, not just what you're consuming, but how is that creating actual change in the professional. So yeah, I think that's about it for my group. I think so.
Awesome, room 2. Anything to add? Nevin, thank you. As articulate as ever. Room 3. Lisa, you might need to nudge somebody who was in room 3.
Renal, Sindiswa, Tinus, and Richard.
Lisa definitely has already, you know, she's put her hand up before. I don't know if she wants to do it again, but maybe some of the others do.
Okay, I will go and then the rest of the group can add to it. I think we built on our first conversation where Richard spoke about the value of training and do the leaders in the organization understand the value that learning brings to the organization. So there was quite a big theme around mindset culture, which also comes through from the other group, is an individual mindset, but also an organizational mindset around learning culture, continuous learning. Tina, for example, spoke about what if we do training and they leave us? What if we don't do training and they stay? To build on that. But I think what is sort of this tracking of the internal learning, informal learning happening, if one can capitalize and harness that way of being, that it's happening internally, but harnessing those skills and further build on the learning culture approach. So the question was no budget is to use what you have internally, harness that, and rather develop your subject matter experts. I think that was the word that was used in that moment, is for the informal learning to happen. In a no budget situation. And as we know, there's lots online available. But what do we need to overcome is, I think from a leadership perspective, how we see and value learning and what learning means at that level.
Thanks, Chanel. I want to jump in and for those, you know, who need to close off at 10:30 and have been gracious enough to stick around. Let's see what we're pulling together. The first thing I hope that you take away, and my observation to a lot of the learning and development people on the call, is that a review of Galbraith's STAR model. Fine, you know, if you drop us a note, we'll send you one of the very simple articles from Galbraith. It's only 6 pages, but it's a way to change the way you're thinking about the problem. Because for so many on this call today, the answer to what if you had no training budget was no. We need a training budget. And so you can't get over that of, well, now I need to think outside all my training and all my experience and all my discipline to say, how could I achieve something without a training budget? And that was a big obstacle, and I want to note it. For a lot of people, that was a difficult, much more difficult than I thought to get over, and I apologize for that. Then the second thing is landing this conception of organizational design as more than individual skill. As you know, how do we think about these systems? And that's being kind of simplified into the effect of management behavior. So that management influence has come across quite strongly. If managers are coaches, if managers are mentors, if managers were recruited properly, that sort of, and yes, managers are important, but managers are part of the design. How do I think about the design beyond the manager as a role? And again, that's something that I'm taking away. It's a difficult idea to land. So yeah, in that management space, individual consideration matters. And I think it really, a lot of what you were saying boils down to that. If the manager can just see that subordinate and work with them and figure out how to guide them and train them, we might have some way of developing without a training budget. So, lots then to take away, I guess, for me, is how to be more helpful with this conversation. How do we look outside of the classic structure of L&D or training and development to bring in innovative solutions that could be worked with that might help you make a difference. And I hope for you, if you think that we've gone a little bit too esoteric or too dense or too much, you're part of our community. Drop us a line, drop us a note, let us know what you think, and we will try and respond. I'm incredibly grateful to everyone who showed up, even more grateful to those who stayed and shared. Our next event is in a month from now, as usual. And we're going to be talking about, let me just get the slide up. There we go. For those of you who are keen and want to get in and register early, it is developing change capability. Change has become an industry with global players. One of the things that came up in our discussion was change readiness, change ability, change capability is difficult without training. Large firms subscribe and pay for approaches to change. And we'll try and focus on what is an internal change practitioner and what can be expected of such a role. I think we hear internal change practitioner used as if it means one thing, and we might want to just unpack that a little and make sense of that. So I hope you can join us. Really appreciate the time you spent with us today. Cheers, everyone. 10:30.
Thank you. Thank you.
Goodbye. Have a good day.
Bye,
Thank you.
Yes, bye.
Bye.